Okay. Well, welcome. Let's, I'm Jack Drescher. Welcome to our IPA Journal Club. Our guest author today is Dr. Salman Akhtar. Can I have the next slide, please? Before we get to introducing Dr. Akhtar, for those of you who have not seen previous versions of the Journal Club, they are all up on the IPA's YouTube channel, and you can, and Agustin will put them in the link now, and maybe we'll put them again in the link at the end of the session as well for the people who come in a little bit later. By way of introduction, Salman Akhtar, MD, is an internationally known psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, writer, and poet who's based in the United States. He's published 114 authored or edited books and given lectures and workshops in over 40 countries. Dr. Akhtar has served on the editorial boards of the three most important journals of our field: the Journal of the American Psychoanalytic Association, the International Journal of Psychoanalysis, and Psychoanalytic Quarterly. His books have been translated into many languages, and he's received numerous professional honors, including the highly prestigious Sigourney Award for his distinguished contributions to psychoanalysis. And recently, a 10-volume set of his selected papers was released at a festive ceremony at the Freud House and Museum in London. Dr. Akhtar has published 19 collections of poetry and serves as a scholar in residence at the Interact Theater Company in Philadelphia. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Akhtar to the Journal Club. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are coming for the first time, the goal of the Journal Club is to be interactive so that you, the readers, can speak directly with our author. And this session is being recorded, and it will be available for viewing both on the IPA website and IPA's YouTube channel at some future date, usually within a week. Agustin de la Lave is our Argentinian tech person, and he's very efficient at that. If you don't want to be recorded, leave your camera off, although Dr. Akhtar says he likes to see faces, so please let him see you. If you do not wish to be recorded, I might not call on you to ask him a question. Next slide. If you have questions or comments, you can put them in the Q&A section. We're not using the chat function for this meeting, but you can use the hand raise function if you want to be called upon. And I think that's our last. When you're called upon, please unmute yourself, turn on your camera if it's not already turned on. And when you're called upon, identify yourself and let us know where you're from. Also, if you're, please speak slowly and clearly, because not everybody who's tuned in is a native English speaker. And if you haven't downloaded the paper yet, Agustin will post it in the chat as well. So I think that's it for the slides for now. Great. And so, Salman, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm here for you.
Oh. I have a technical problem at my end. Welcome. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, and I can hear you. That's a good thing. So, good morning. So you're in Philadelphia, correct?
Yes.
Yes, and I'm in New York. And so we have people coming into the room. As we learned, about 800 people have signed up, but only 15 of you are here. So we're glad to see you. And so
we leave 785. That's all.
Well, the thing is, many people know that they will be sent a link to the recording after, when it comes. So people are, maybe everybody's having an emergency today. Who knows? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with the first question. I have some questions and comments to make. And so we're talking about your paper, From Schisms Through Synthesis to Informed Oscillation, an attempt at integrating some diverse aspects of psychoanalytic technique. And Dr. Akhtar, since you're a guest author speaking at a journal club meeting, maybe you could tell everyone something about your interest in writing. You're obviously a prolific writer. Why do you write? How do you organize your writing? And any advice for aspiring scholarly writers?
All right. I was expecting that we'll begin with this paper, but that's also a very important question. So I wasn't prepared for this, but that's
Good,
okay.
good.
Yeah, that's, I'm asked this question though many times.
Yes.
See, there are many things that go into this. First and foremost, like Freud says, every dream begins from above and below. Below meaning infantile residues, day triggers. The two meet and something happens. Same thing with creativity, I think. It comes from above and below. So from below, I grew up in a family of writers. Both my parents were initially teachers and professors, and then they quit and they became full-time writers. So as a result, writing was, and my uncle and my grandfather and my grandfather's mother and her father and his father and so on and so forth. So everybody wrote. I counted how many books they wrote together. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my grandfather's mother, my father, my mother, my uncle, my brother. And they came out to be 33. So I decided the best thing to do is to write 100. So that's how it began. So there's something from inside. Then, of course, outside, I mean, psychoanalysis, you study. I grew up in a very, very formal and very, very strict classical training. And there was no Klein, of course not. Klein was like Hitler. You couldn't take the name. Klein, no Winnicott, no Fairbairn, no Guntrip, no Ballant, no nothing, right? So, but a candidate who was 1 year senior than me, Tom Woolman, he was a very good guy. He introduced me to Winnicott. And I started reading and I said, this makes a lot of sense. So, bit by bit, by reading British analysis and by seeing patients and my own internal experiences, I found that the classical training had prepared me for some things, but not prepared me for some things. And I think this paper written about 25 years ago, I graduated from the Analytic Institute in 86.
Which institute did you go to?
In Philadelphia Psychoanalytic Institute.
Mhm.
So from 79 to 86, I was a candidate. 86, I graduated. This paper is written in 14 years later. And there's an old saying. It says it takes 10 years to do psychoanalytic training and 10 years to recover from it. So I think it was in the beginning of the second 10 years. It was largely an attempt to heal my own internal splits by having had a very rigorous classical indoctrination in training and then surreptitiously and clandestinely reading British analysis. So I had to do something. Yeah. And clinical experience had taught me that we needed both.
Yeah, thank you. That's very impressive, really. The other question I had was about the footnote. You write at the beginning of your paper that the paper was written in honor of Arnold Cooper. Could you elaborate upon the relationship between Dr. Cooper and the paper and yourself?
Dr. Cooper was extremely nice to me, extremely nice to me. I had these three people in New York who were very good to me, although I was not a direct supervisee of them. Otto Kernberg, Arnold Cooper, and Ted Shapiro. All three of them were very, very kind to me. Here in Philadelphia, my main mentor was Selma Kramer, and before Philadelphia, Vamek Volkan. So these are the five people who, and Harold Blum was also nice much later. These 5, 6 people helped me and pulled me up. Arnie was the person who first put me on the board of the International Journal of Psychoanalysis. And in a conflict that happened that cannot be discussed here with some other colleagues, rather bloody conflict, he saved me and was on my side and really stood up for me. and such. So I am deeply, deeply grateful to him. And I would meet him a number of times. And whenever he asked me to do something, I immediately did. And he would respond by saying, "You are an angel," you know, which, both flattered me and confused me because I knew the dirt on myself. So so, but yeah, so he was very good. So when they were Sandler and Fonagy and Bob Michaels were putting a book together in his honor, they asked me to write a chapter. I wrote this. They said it's too big. We didn't expect it to be so long, but they were asking, "Can you write a shorter paper?" I didn't want to cut this paper. So I wrote a second paper, which is a small paper called The Shy Narcissist, which is in his first drift. And this one then I sent to the journal.
I have more questions for you, but I would like to encourage anybody in the audience, if you have a question about the paper or comment about the paper, to either use the hand raise or use the Q&A section and let me know if you'd like to join in the conversation, because we would like some interaction with our readers here, if possible. Next one, so we go. All right. In case two, so this is about, we're going back to the paper. So in your second case, your needy patient repeatedly drives around your home. Rather than feeling stalked, you report feeling curious about what her behavior might mean. And you raise the question, and this is my interpretation of what you said, of whether her behavior might reflect her hostility toward you or whether the primary desire was closeness, presumably based on her needy, perhaps an affectionate attachment to you. Which of course brought to my mind Winnicott, which you hadn't got to yet in the paper, but you do cite him 3 times in your paper. But I was reminded of his paper on hate in the countertransference, which is not cited, and how the analyst expresses his hate for the patient, in his words, by the existence of the end of the hour. Any thoughts about that in terms of this paper and your work with this patient?
See, I think what is not in the paper, because as you think further, more ideas come to. A little bit, I presented this material in a study group that I was a member of at that time. And there were 5 other members, all of them senior than me in the institute. They were horrified at the fact that I was not horrified. And I wasn't horrified. They were upset at the fact that I was not upset. They were pretty much angry at the fact that I was not angry, and they kept telling me that I should be afraid. That's like my saying, Jack, I think you should eat a hamburger right now. Why? I mean, you don't feel like eating it, and if you felt like it, you would have eaten it. So they were telling me what I should feel. I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't feeling it. Now, I think some of it, not entire, I think about 19.5% perhaps has to do with my being from India. That is another aspect that has to be accounted for. You see, in India, everybody is into everybody's business. There's no such thing as a unitary, clearly etched out self, right? I mean, I was in India 10 days ago. Sitting in a lobby, a guy comes up to me, "Sir, I heard you were a psychoanalyst." I said, "Yes." "Sir, I'm having a dream about having sex with my aunt's daughter. Can you help me with this? It's very disturbing." It's called lobby therapy. People are walking around. The guy is telling me his dream, an erotic dream, is standing up and he wants my help. It can happen. These are things like that. So some of it may have to do with my Indian openness and non-vulnerability to closeness, non-anxiety with closeness, that I wasn't so troubled by her driving by the car in front of my house. And the car will slow down and then pick up the speed. I could see it from the kitchen.
You did mention in the paper once you felt some annoyance as she drove by, I recall. No, I don't recall that.
Maybe mild, but not really. And,
Okay.
and it was, so I think some of it was Indian, some, 20%. Some of it was, I think, personal, temperamental, because I'm a lot of woman inside of me, and so I think that I think has a more accommodating effect. The womanness, the Indianness. I think both of those things made a difference, and Anglophilia, which led to the love of Winnicott and everything. I think that's why I was responding differently than my American seniors in their study group.
Right. You just make me think about a patient that I treated actually someone I'm still treating now for about 30 years, 30 some odd years, who, as a condition of treatment, wanted to know if it was okay if I didn't know his last name. And there was a reason, and I was the third person who got to see him, because the first two people he asked were not comfortable with that as a condition. So the referral got bounced to me eventually. And I remember feeling great anxiety about it, but also some curiosity and intrigued by what it might mean. And what was interesting about it was, so he insisted on paying me at every session with a check. And his bank told him it was okay to use a magic marker to cross out his name, so that I would get a check every week when he came in, and it was coming once a week, in which he would come in and with a check with his name blacked out with a magic marker. And then maybe like 4 or 5 months in, he had forgotten to do it. And I saw the name, and it wasn't like a Smith or a Jones name. It was a complicated name. So I didn't comment on it, and didn't say anything. And then, like a few months later, he came in and he said he got his check back from the bank, and he saw that, not the one that I had seen, but several months later, he had done it again. And I hadn't noticed it, but he had. So this enactment was a very interesting, performance about the meaning of it. But we continued working together for about 3 to 4 years, and then he wanted to take a break. And then he came back saying he had written a book and he wanted me to write a blurb on his book. And I said I would be happy to write a blurb after I read the book, but he had to tell me his name, for me to do that. And so 5 or 6 years later, I found out what his last name was. Now I know it. But there's sort of this thing about the ways in which patients can make us uncomfortable, and yet other feelings about our relationships with them, which I saw in the paper, come to the forefront.
Yeah, going to the name, I had a patient who said he'll never tell me his real name, and I asked him why, and he gave me a reason that was convincing, that was very convincing. So then I asked him, let us suppose we do begin working together, and let us suppose 4 months pass, 6 months pass, 8 months pass, and you are now feeling very comfortable with me, and you like me and you trust me. Do you think then maybe you will tell me your name? He says, that's possible. I said, okay, in that case, we can begin. No problem. So I began, and less than 3 or 4 months later, he told me his name. He had already given a good reason, and which has to do with some legal situation. But anyway, so I mean, we have to play it, with empathy, intuition, some risk taking. We have to see how this is going to unfold. I wasn't terrified of this patient or terrified is a strong word, as frightened or as angry. Therefore, and the fear feeds anger, and anger feeds the fear by projection. As my colleagues. And I think the difference was that they were far more classical. I had by this time begun moving towards more middle and such. Now I'm far left or far right, whatever that's called.
Right. Yes. Um, I have some more questions I'd love to ask, but anybody in the audience feel motivated to ask a question?
How many people we have? 16 only. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Everybody, is there something in the chat? There's someone in the Q&A.
That
Andrew,
shows the
okay.
Infatuation and love.
Okay, Andrew Bowman, you have a question. Would you turn on your camera and ask the question yourself? Andrew, you there? Hi.
Can you?
Could you unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and tell us where you are? Okay, we're waiting. We're patient. You have to unmute yourself. Okay. Now we don't see you either. Welcome back.
Okay, you should be able to hear me now.
We hear you now, yes.
Sorry. Normally I can handle technological difficulties better than this, but then this happens. Thank you. My question is, how do you think the community is doing with these schisms today? Recognizing this paper was written in 2000, just want to get a sense of like what your sense is, like how you've seen like kind of like the dialogues being about handling these today.
Andrew, where are you?
I'm located in Chicago. I'm a psychologist.
Okay.
I think psychoanalytic community has a kind of built-in internal restlessness and finds it very hard to tolerate states of quiescence and stability and peace. And most of that is rationalized and justified and is rational and just in the service of new discoveries. But in the service of new discoveries and new paradigms, there always creeps in the old uh, old schisms and such. So now we have this thing called relational and, by implication, non-relational psychoanalysis. There are two kinds of analysis now: relational and non-relational. Which I think is a implicit reference to the excessive austerity of the so-called Freudian analyst in so-called New York. You know, um, I think, in in backwaters, I think they call it. That's the right phrase, Jack. Backwaters.
Backwaters, yes. Backwaters, you mean like Philadelphia?
Yeah, exactly. That like in backwater, like Philadelphia, such trouble didn't happen that much. Although we split into institutes, one institute became classical, one became developmental. So the names keep changing. The names keep changing. In Turkey, where psychoanalysis was on the rise, there are three groups, and at real, friction with each other. So I think that there is see, I've come up with newer names and newer ways of conceptualizing this split. This was 25 years ago. One is a motherless psychoanalysis and a fatherless psychoanalysis. That when analysis is happening, uh, is the mother present in the room, really, in the heart of the patient and in the heart of the analyst, more importantly later? Or is the father present in the analysis? And what kinds of oscillations are happening in these two transference and countertransference and alliance paradigms? So I think there's some people are practicing motherless psychoanalysis. Some people are practicing fatherless psychoanalysis. I mean, there's a group of analysts. Some of them so to speak, are my very good friends, who believe that interpretation is a violence. And it's not our job to interpret anything. Our job is to facilitate the patient's own self-discovery in their own terms, in their own voice, at their own pace. And our job is only resistance analysis, not terribly even referring to it in transference, only referring to it in its intrapsychic dangers in the here and now. So that's the fatherless analysis, an assumption that every session should end on congeniality. That is the most outrageous thing I've ever heard. But there is a flavor, I don't know in Chicago or not. There's an assumption that has come up that the session should end cordially. Why? Why? Right? That is the fatherless attitude, and such. So this motherless, fatherless. Even finer, I think, way of talking about this is that, there's a concept in Winnicott called survival of the object. Okay. Now, that is like, what can the analyst bear? What can the analyst bear? In terms of like famous story of Alvin Semrad, the revered clinician in Boston. He was talking to a psychotic patient who became more and more rational as they talked. And medical student asked him, Dr. Semrad, do you think such sick people can be treated with psychotherapy? He said, yes, anybody can be treated with psychotherapy. Depends upon what the analyst is capable of bearing. Right? So now that is the Winnicott flavor, the survival of the object. But in the Klein and Freudian tradition, the issue is of survival of the subject. What can the patient bear? So are we doing an analysis to demonstrate and achieve survival of object or survival of subject or both? Do you see? Those are the ways, new ways of thinking, I think, about it. But there's a smell of old stuff in it also, undeniably.
You talk about Andrew. Did you feel that answered your question, by the way? Yes. Good. Okay. I actually was intrigued, since my area of interest has to do with gender, and gender, of course, is a very controversial subject today. I'm not sure we're going to address that controversy, but what intrigued me when I was reading the paper, I was intrigued by presenting by how you attribute gendered meanings to the homeostatic and disruptive attunement, with fathers engaging in homeostatic attunement while mothers did disruptive attunement. Right? That's the others? Oh, it's my error. Okay. Well, let me ask, but regardless which gender does what, do you today in 2025, I guess you do, believe in the gendered meanings of these behaviors, that these interactions are either maternal feminine and disrupt or paternal masculine? Because I guess you do, because now I heard you in answering Andrew's question, you use that language.
In the sense that when the mother is absent in that experiment, this was in Boston, these experiments were done with many couples of many races also, which was the richness of the experiment. That they didn't only have, as many experiments happen, only white people. They had black people in this also. The interesting thing was that when they send the father first, then the father behaves in what they call a maternal way, in an affirmative way. So I think the issue is not so much gender as that yes always precedes no. In development, in ontogenesis, the baby says yes before the baby knows no. The parent says yes before the parent knows no, so to speak. So yes must always precede no. That is the principle. So if a patient says to me, I had a dream last night in which I saw that I was in a yellow car driving very fast, and I was very drunk, and I wasn't afraid, but my partner sitting next to me was screaming in fear. Okay, and then the patient says, I think it has to do with blah, 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 blah. I might say, yes, I think that's a very interesting way of looking at the dream. But how about the fact that the car was yellow? You don't say anything about it, right? So meaning, yes, then. We can call it mother, father, we can call it relational, unrelational, objective, you know. I mean, objective analysis is like, if a patient says, I just before coming to the session, I ate a banana and two meatballs. The analyst says, I think you want to perform fellatio on me, suck my penis, and play with my balls. Patient sues you, you go in the court, you say, sir, it is written in this book that banana means penis and meatballs mean testicles. So that's what I said. I think you'll be fine. You'll be fine. With objective analysis, you'll be fine because it's written down. They follow the theory,
Oh, yeah. Really laughing. So we talked earlier about Greenberg and Mitchell. Their dichotomy was one person versus two person analyses, so that the whole notion of a relational psychoanalysis comes out of the traditions. I trained at the William Allison White Institute, where both of them trained as well. The interpersonal tradition is a sort of a kind of developed in dialectic with ego psychology. That is, it's very hard to get an interpersonalist when I was in training to explain what is it that you're doing without their talking about what they were not doing in relationship to that. And what was interesting to me in reading your paper really was you, within the traditions of what, look very both classical and romantic, there's still part of that outside, traditions outside the interpersonal tradition, and you struggle with saying there's a way to think about both of you don't have to do either or. You can do both, depending on the context, depending on the patient.
See, Jack, the problem was that we grew up with, I don't know about you, I grew up with in the training, with not only being taught what to read, but implicitly and sometimes explicitly what not to read. And that was not a good thing. That was not a good thing, right? What not to read. So if you were reading something, they thought that this was like heresy or something. You shouldn't be reading such a stuff. So the whole Sullivan, Horney, Fromm section went. The Winnicott, Ballant, Fairburn, Guntrip section went. And, I mean, I remember a debate between Merton Gill and Otto Kernberg in 1988 in Empire Room in Waldorf. And both vehemently accusing each other, accusing exactly the right word in this context, of being interpersonal. As if there was such a horrible thing to be interpersonal. I remember it very clearly. So we were taught what not to read. And I have kind of crawled out of that to read the prohibited, so to speak. And crawling out of it, and it has helped me. I regret that I have not read Jung. I'm getting old now, and I may not get time to. There might be some good stuff there also. How can there not be? I mean, he was no dummy. He was a smart guy. So there must be Jungian stuff that may be good that we need to bring in. But psychoanalysis was very cloistered and very, they threw people out. If this was happening today, people would not be thrown out. People would still be, we will mend fences with them.
I would, you remind me of a very, very well-written book by Paul Stepansky. I don't know if you read Psychoanalysis at the Margins.
No,
it's really a brilliant book. Actually, everybody in training should read this book, if you're going into psychoanalytic training. But, Stepansky was the publisher of the Analytic Press. Yeah. And self-disclosure, that was the press that published my book in the 1990s. And he was there for a long time. And he's trained as a historian of science. He has a PhD. And has written some very interesting books about the medical science and things like that. But what he says in this book, which is brilliant, is that when psychoanalysts disagree with each other about theory, they don't test their theories against each other. He uses a comparison with cardiology. He says there are no schools of cardiology, that if you have different ideas, the ideas have to be tested against each other so that the field can come to some kind of consensus about what might work best. Instead, and this is from a publisher's perspective, psychoanalysts break away from each other and they form their own journals and their own books. And I love the example he gives. Otto Fenichel, when his book, his double volume book, which I have somewhere on a shelf somewhere here, came out in the 1940s. It sold 80,000 copies. You can't find a psychoanalytic book in the modern era that would sell anything near that, because not everybody is reading the same psychoanalyst for exactly the reasons that you talk about. And so these aspects raises the question, of course. You try in your paper to an integrative approach, but is it really possible, given all the theories that we have, to have an integrative approach?
Even that integrative approach, as you said, is limited. It didn't include many people. I mean, the best I was able to do is the dictionary that I wrote. I think that is the best I could do.
When did your dictionary come out?
2009.
2009. Okay. I recommend looking for Salman's dictionary. Anybody else in the audience would like to ask a question or raise a comment? Arlene, you have a headache? Is that? I know you're keeping very uncharacteristically quiet, so I just.
Yeah,
Howard, you're next after Arlene. Go ahead, Arlene.
let me explain myself. I'm Arlene
Okay.
Neiman. I'm a graduate of the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. And I'm a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst, and I'm also a fiction writer. I thought this was a lovely paper. So it was hard to disagree with anything, which is usually a starting point. It was also, I thought you answered so much, it's hard to come up with a question. And the mark to me of a good paper is that I start thinking about a patient to whom this would be relevant, or I think about myself or someone I'm close to. The patient that I saw just before this meeting is a very fragile woman. I've been seeing her for 10 years, and she, both her parents should have been in jail. Literally, the mother knifed the father and left her alone as a kid to deal with this. And the father burned the mother's face with a cigar. So, and what was going on is she was living in a war zone, really. Things were being thrown. The mother would throw things at her daughters. She had 2 daughters. So here one has to use, and she's a very intelligent person, but of course she's frightened of everybody. And the way she responds is by backing off. And I'm able to use both interpretive approaches and sort of educational, supportive. I mean, I put my hand over my face sometimes at the stories that she tells of what goes on. So I'm not a rubber-faced analyst at all. And I try to use whatever seems relevant. Object relations theory seems relevant. It's lots of times in the sense that I was able to say last time, and she managed it, that to make everyone into a monster, she lives in an apartment building and is terrified of everybody, I said, is nasty. You're calumniating everybody around you. So I was looking at the aggression that's when you have terrible parents, you want to get rid of them. I mean, I half the time listening to her want to choke her parents. Fortunately, they're both dead. But sometimes I think the two of us should go with axes to the graveyard and just smash up the coffins and get at those people because they're so terrible. But one also has to see what in the patient is behaving like them. And the suspiciousness of her mother, which she hated, she is really showing that suspiciousness to everyone around by imagining they're all going to hurt her. She doesn't damage them in the way that her mother would make. Even the nurse who took care of her towards the end, the nurse would cry. The mother was so mean. But she damages the possibility of love by imagining the other person's a monster, so she has to keep away.
Arlene, let me just say, why do you think this paper brought this patient to mind? What do you think?
Why?
Was the
It was
connection?
because of the integrative aspect of it, that sometimes you're using interpretations and including interpretations of aggression, and other times you are helping the patient understand what her parents did to her. You're being supportive, you're there, and sometimes you tell things about yourself. So I thought it was a lovely paper in that way. And it helped me not feel, I would tend to feel guilty about being supportive, but I'm naturally supportive. It's by nature, I'm kind of warm. I get close to the patient. I don't sit at I'm not like Putin, who needs to keep at a huge distance. I thought the paper allowed for both. That's why I don't have any questions about it. I mean,
well, we can also have comments without questions, but
Okay.
I wonder, Salman, did you have any thoughts about that?
I have a comment. First of all, when you don't have to say that you are by nature kind and supportive, your face shows that. It's on your face, What struck me in all this, and certainly both approaches are needed, that no wonder you are paranoid about people and suspicious of people because people have not been good to you, so you would be vulnerable to that. And do you see how you're saying that people are bad messes you up further? Both things are needed. What struck me, though, was the following. 3 of your gestures. One was of putting your hand on your eyes. One was of the axe that these people should have been beaten or killed, and one was moving close, and there was one more. I'm trying to remember. There were 4 bodily gestures in your describing your interaction. Hand moving. You move your chair a little bit right now. You move this way, and hand and the hitting and squeeze. And squeeze be double the squeeze, one from front, one from back. So it was not sufficient one. I thought that tells us something about this patient too, something very deep and significant, that this has gotten in our body. Some things get in your body, and those things are either you have to go to Australia to fix them. You can fix them in USA. USA is a dangerous country, meaning like Bessel van der Kolk. He doesn't do many things in USA that he does abroad, holding a patient's arm this way, pushing the patient's neck this way, and so on. We can do this. Norwegian tried this. They were thrown out of IPA for 30 years. Now they have come back into the fold. But there is the issue of body in this patient too much, which like Dorothy Burlingham's paper on body empathy is coming out of you now, that you are responding bodily. So there's not only the affirmative interventions and the interpretive interventions, but the non-verbal bodily interventions are also recorded by the patient. That's what I think. I have recently commented upon moments in analysis where utter stillness is needed, bodily stillness. Like you cannot move your finger like this. in that moment. You cannot go like this. No, you have to be like this and utterly still. And what does that utter stillness accomplish and do? And why is that needed? Sometimes reverse the various body postures and such. The best book, current best book in my opinion, is by a Norwegian analyst called John Sletvold, Sletvold. Sletvold is called The Embodied Analyst. I think Ted Jacobs' book, Uses of the Self, was good, but I think Sletvold's book is more up to date and more, because it talks about, non-verbal interventions, and this is one of them. That's what I picked up.
I think that's fascinating, and what you saw in me as I was talking. And I just want to make one brief comment, which was when Jack called on me, he said, "Arlene, do you have a headache?" Because I had my hand over my face. It was in reaction. Nobody's asking any questions, and I had an impulse to help out, but I didn't have a question. I had comments, and I didn't want to make this about me. So I'm sitting there like that, trying to figure what to do.
No, this was very nice.
So we do have Howard, you had your hand up. Howard Gorman, could you introduce yourself and tell us where you are? You have to unmute yourself first, though.
I practice in Toronto, and so I have to apologize for two reasons. One is that I did not read the paper, and the other is I was busy with something else and I joined 15 minutes late. So I might say things that are not exactly on point or that have been duplicated. You'll have to forgive me. My background before I went to medical school, psychiatry, and psychoanalysis is as a mathematician and a physicist. So I come at this with that history, which is not to say that I'm pragmatic and going to reduce everything to the numbers, quite the reverse. But I think listening to what's been happening so far, that what strikes me is that I think the most emphasized and under-recognized aspects of Freud's thinking in terms of the part it's played is his, call it, discovery of primary process. Because once you take primary process seriously, all kinds of things follow from that, and all kinds of objections that I think people have been expressing about the schisms and the differences and the controversies and the arguments disappear. Because in primary process, everything is allowed to be thought. There aren't any contradictions. Things coexist, etc. And everything is considered to not be not a pure truth, but a compromise formation of all kinds of things and a combination of all kinds of things at the same time. Once you're really comfortable with that idea, there's no reason anymore to have these debates and these hostile debates that have come up over the years. And I can compare that. The reason I said something about my background is that in a small way, physics had to deal with that the secondary process that one usually thinks of and that what psychoanalysis seems to be stuck in is the Newtonian paradigm of the 19th century. And because physics, and as somebody was saying earlier, that physics is burdened by the fact of having to provide experiments that verify their contentions, they had to deal with relativity theory and quantum mechanics, which didn't make sense in terms of how they thought. How could the speed of light be the same for everybody? That doesn't make sense. How could things that were separated by such and such distances somehow instantly affect one another? That doesn't make sense. They had to at least stretch their idea of secondary process to involve kinds of logic that are not part of the world as we live it, and as we lived it in the.
Howard, let me interrupt you.
Sure.
Okay, so before Salman, I was just thinking, how could we get psychoanalysts to agree on anything, including primary process? But Salman, you have any thoughts about this issue?
I have two thoughts. When you said you have not read the paper, I wish I could say I have not written it. But that would have been and made the playing field level. But unfortunately, I have. So I'm sorry. The other thought I had was Robert Welder. Robert Welder also came to psychoanalysis through physics and mathematics, which is very evident in his 1936 paper, Principle of Multiple Function, in which he says everything has at least 8 consequences, and he figures out how those. Anyway, I agree with you about 78%. I don't agree with you the remaining 22%. What I agree with you is that I think unless we are comfortable with the ways of the unconscious, among which primary process is one, obviously then we are gone astray in psychoanalysis. We have to be comfortable with and knowledgeable about the ways of the unconscious. How does the unconscious work? What does the unconscious have? What is the purpose of the unconscious? And so on and so forth. What are the contents of it? What are the purposes of it? What are the methods of it? And such. And primary process is one of the significant aspects of it, both of the system unconscious and partly for the system preconscious. So in that, I agree with you. About, did I say 78%? I'll make it 79. The remaining 21%, I do not agree. What I do not agree is that the comment about that primary process inevitably includes compromise formations. I think compromise formation is already a function of the ego and requires assessments of reality, superego, id, ego ideal, object, self, and so on and so forth. So the compromise formation is a function out of the layer where we are talking of primacy, the supremacy of the primal process. That is one theoretical and I think important technical difference. But otherwise, I think what you say is wonderful and fully agreeable.
Yes.
Technically, their sense of that is a civilized wildness must be available to the psychoanalyst, both in listening and in intervening. A civilized wildness. Only civilized is not good. It produces a caricature of analysis. Only wildness is not good. That creates disasters. But a civilized wildness is essential. Otherwise, we're just talking of facts. May I give an example of this kind of intervention?
Yes.
Somebody that I was treating said that very negative things about themselves constantly. Enormous amount of self-hatred, enormous amount of self-loathing. I'm bad, I'm stupid, I can't decide anything, I'm inept, I'm this. It just goes on. From time to time, from the chinks of the door, you can hear such and such person was saying, I'm very good at such and such person loves me, I got such and such award. Rarely this blip comes. So I collect this like a stamp collector. I keep them in a nice album. I'll use them someday. The person also hates one of their child and hates the child vehemently. They have more children, that particular child. And that particular child, the person makes all kinds of dire predictions. The kid will never finish high school. The kid will at best end up in a lousy community college. The kid most likely will become 40 years old, living in our basement, doing nothing, unemployed. But again, about the kid, from time to time, I hear he got A plus, he got honors in that. His teacher sent me that people love him in their school and blah, blah, blah. So I'm collecting that also. One day, and this goes on and on and on, and I do interpretive work, affirmative work, blah, blah. I know it's sad that you feel this way. I know since you were treated this way, therefore, blah, blah. One day, the patient says, again about the kid, that the kid is going to be a disaster, never go to college, never finish high school, live forever in our house, blah, 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 and predicting the kid's future. So I said, I have a future prediction for a child also. So the patient says, like what? I said, the kid will, I think 15 years from now, 20 years from now, he'll be associate professor of mathematics. Dr. Goldman, you'd like this. Associate professor of mathematics in University of Michigan. And he'll be living near the campus, and he will have a girlfriend who will be Japanese and 12 years older than him. The patient says, what? What did you say? What is this? How did you come up with this? I said, I don't know. But if you give me a minute, I'll think and I'll be able to tell you why. She said, okay, take a minute. And after a minute, I said, look, here it is. You say that he'll go to this stupid, dumb community college, while you, your husband, your mother, your father, your brother, all of them have been Ivy League. So I mixed up, I think, my unconscious between this stupid community college and Ivy League, University of Michigan. That's a good compromise. Secondly, I send him away from you because you really hate him. But I put him close to the campus. So a maternal environment he would still need. I gave him a girlfriend who would be Japanese. Because you are treating him so badly, he's not going to sleep with a woman like you. Therefore, I gave him a Japanese girlfriend. And finally, I made her 12 years older because he will still need a mother. That's how it works. Now, please understand, have some sense of humor and stay in the transitional realm. You will find that in this course prediction, I'm not only fixing her image of the child, but behind that, I'm fixing her image as a mother. And as there are possibilities of between Ivy League and this lousy community college. Now, this kind of civilized wildness, I think, is essential for our work. Otherwise, we are just saying words. And this involves a primary process, because I said to her, I don't know why I said this, but if you allow me a minute or two, I'll think and I'll tell you why I think. So that, it came out as a thing presentation. Then it had to be turned into a word presentation. And we have to, from time to time, permit ourselves this kind of poetic luxury.
I was just going to say, I've just solved the mystery of the attendance here, because people have been pouring into the room now. There was a change. There was the United States. We moved our clocks forward before Europe. So I think 11 o'clock our time, I think, was 3 o'clock your time in England, at least, Greenwich time. So that's so everybody's because we had over about 800 people sign up for this, and when we started an hour ago, there was only 15 people in the room. But
do tariffs.
So maybe we can run a little bit over time. I have some of the questions I could ask. Is there anybody else who's read the paper who has a comment who would like to ask Dr. Akhtar a question? If so, make sure your camera is showing and you can unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you. William, nice to see you. Do you have any questions for Dr. Akhtar on your reading?
No, I'm very sorry to have missed the conversation because it was a fabulous paper. Thank you very much. And I think I saw in this example something about this different sort of this particular type of listening. And I was just hoping to hear sort of more about this sort of oscillation between the two attitudes, and one perhaps in preparation for the other.
Yes. And sometimes these oscillations can be minute to minute. Sometimes it may be that the beginning of the session and the end of the session is one way and the middle of the session is another way. Sometimes one session is another way, or maybe two, and then the third session is another way. So these are oscillations, not necessarily rapid and not necessarily slow. They can happen different ways,
I must say what I felt very envious of listening, reading the paper was the sense of confidence that you seem to feel when you have this movement inside about what to say, how to interpret.
Address that.
Mm.
There are two models of apprenticeship. One mostly in West and one mostly in East. When I was a medical student in India and a psychiatry resident in India, I did psychiatry in India and then again here in USA. We would, like my professor would say, there are 8 kinds of paranoid delusions. This kind, I can still tell you, but I won't bore you with that. 8 kinds of paranoid delusions. There are 12 signs of catatonia and blah, blah, blah. And we were little boys and girls and we will listen. We never asked, why are you telling me this? We never say, what should we do with this? We never say, how is this useful? What is the purpose of knowing this? We just ate it up. Now, in USA, I was in 47 years, I just retired some 10, 12 months ago. 47 years I worked in the medical school, full time. And I was every Wednesday morning for 47 years, from 9 to 10:30, I'll teach around one case medical students. The moment I open my mouth, they say, so what should I do with this? What is the use of knowing this? How does this apply? And such. That is one kind of apprenticeship model, and that is another kind. Now, with those two different apprenticeship models, the long-term consequences of them are entirely different. The apprentice who begins with questions ends up a tentative, uh-oh. The apprentice, there was a call, I cut it off. The apprentice who starts with questioning ends up himself a modest and a tentative teacher. The apprentice who has absorbed everything in the faith that one day it'll come handy, grows differently and becomes a more definitive teacher. I think that's my understanding of this. And some people, one person called me some place arrogant in this. But the arrogance, I think, is shown not so much by how one speaks. I come from a family of poets and film actors. So as a result, there's some stylishness associated. But it's not how one speaks. And it's not even how one writes. It's about how one reads and whether one reads. That's where arrogance is shown. And I don't think anybody can ever register a complaint against me that I have not read.
We have some hands raised. I'll just say to everybody, there was a time confusion about when we started because the United States moved our clocks forward last Sunday. So we've actually been here for over an hour. But Salman, if you could stay a little bit later than 12:15, I think maybe we can accommodate some of the latecomers. Hans, could you unmute yourself? Tell us who you are, where you are.
My name is Hans Schulze-Jena. I work and live in Hamburg, Germany. And I read the paper beforehand and I told many colleagues about it because for me it was an eye-opening. I'm a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist in private practice. And
where are you?
In Hamburg, Germany.
Oh, Hamburger. Mm-hmm. Hamburg.
Yeah. And I very much enjoyed reading the paper because it offered a solution to the usual thing that divides, that creates a lot of divides in institutions, in our training institute, where you either belong to the Kleinians or the Freudians or some other group, or the relational psychoanalysts. And I think this paper really offers a way of approaching the different positions in a very different way. And I was kind of sad that I read it so late, and the paper is from 2000, so I could have read it 25 years ago, and I think it would have helped me. What I find particularly sad is that there was this confusion about the time, which apparently afflicted a vast majority of all the attendants. So one could say it would be nice if the organizers have some other way than just prolonging this session and the discussion, because I enter a discussion without having listened to the paper again or to whatever Mr. Akhtar was talking about.
Hans, I would just add that this entire meeting has been recorded, so within a week
right.
within
Okay.
a week or so, the recording of the entire session will be
Wonderful.
available,
Wonderful. Okay.
and everybody who's registered will get a link to the recording.
Good
So
news.
again,
Yeah.
this is one of those, another human error thing that
Yes, it is.
we'll
I
think
just
about
wonder-
next year in March. We'll remember that this happened this year.
Yes, yes. Yeah, actually, there are programs that offer you to take care of all these different national policies of changing the time and everything else. So if you provide a link for that. But okay, I wanted to complain a little bit because I was
Please, you have every right to
but
complain.
thank you for
I will be
offering-
I'll be Winnicottian and accept the complaint. Is that okay?
wonderful. Yes.
All right.
Especially that you have a solution with the recording that will make up for some.
So we have Jan, could you unmute yourself, tell us who you are and where you are?
Yes, my name is Jan. I'm in Zurich. I work as an analyst in private practice. And I also very much regret this misunderstanding that apparently was also replicated by Zoom, because they sent out the invitation for 5 o'clock Central European time. And so apparently Zoom is not in touch with the time zones that they are operating in. But so I'm looking forward to listening to the recording as well. Somewhat related to what Hans was saying, I enjoyed reading the paper very much, and also some of the references that you gave, Salman. And all institutes, all case conferences, all clinical seminars, they are fraught with this problem. That they always end up in a sort of civil war and splitting between the people looking at the same material by putting on their glasses and absolutely not understanding what the other side is saying and also doing when they are doing the presentation. Now, I have a question for you, Salman, and that's related to this aspect. I mean, in these clinical conferences, we are not stupid people, okay? So, but still, it would seem to me that it's not only our reluctance, to sort of to learn to see the deficit aspect if we're coming more from the conflictual lens. It would seem to me, and maybe you can confirm that or give us your thoughts, that we as analysts, we have sort of a default mode of functioning. So it's not so easy to implement your paper in practice. Then you make it seem. I think for many of us who are willing to listen to the other side, there is something that we have to cultivate, or sort of a muscle that we have to train in order to achieve an ability, to switch. And many of these conflicts, they result from the fact that when in doubt, we're either going for interpretation or we're going to some sort of affirmation of the patient's experience.
I think you're quite right insofar as that that the analyst is vulnerable to align themselves with a theory that fits their character also, their character style, and the predominance of identifications. To listen, one needs to be a baby and a receptive organ, to speak, one needs to be an insertive or assertive organ. And multiple identifications with father, mother, their sexualities, the baby, the mother's feeding, all kinds of identifications precipitates in the psyche have to be activated or get activated. So it depends. I mean, like take Ferenczi. Ferenczi, there's a paper dying to be written called "Was Ferenczi a Woman?" ? That's a paper, nice title of a paper, which is dying to be written. Or, similarly, I know gender is a difficult situation right now, and, it's not so binary, but there's another paper called, equally valid paper written was Mrs. Klein, actually Mr. Klein, ? So, Klein and Ferenczi, I think, are two examples which show us that it's not about physical body. It's about attitudes. And those attitudes themselves have been essentialized and named masculine and feminine. They may not be. But there is something to the character. What we have more, some people are temperamentally Winnicottian, temperamentally Freudian, and temperamentally Kleinian, to take three major things, and obviously different interpretations arise from these. And I think it is necessary for us to train ourselves to know the three interpretations and then choose. See, I think our work is done in an arc. First happens hearing. We hear the patient's noises, sounds, words, head scratching, lip smacking, rubbing the wall of the couch and such. We hear. Then comes listening, meaning we already select some stuff, assign that some significance, and discard some stuff. Then goes understanding, fully understanding, whereby we enter a room where Freud, Klein, and Winnicott are sitting, and we ask them, what does it mean? And they tell us what does it mean, each of them, and when we decide which sort of makes sense to us. Then we go to another room where our old four supervisors and our training analysts, one or two, are sitting. And we ask them, is this really good? And how can I say it? And then we ask, then we are coming out and we run into our mothers and fathers. And we say, Mom, Dad, what the words you taught me when I was a little boy, how to say this? And then we come out and decide to say it. So this cycle, this arc from hearing to speaking, goes through pre-conscious, unconscious things. But in that process, a bunch of character, as evolved by early upbringing and as shaped by analytic training and one's analysis and supervision, does play a role and make some people intrinsically Kleinian, intrinsically Winnicottian, and intrinsically Freudian and such, And I think we have to, it's our job to learn the other side. Is idealization a developmental need, or is idealization a defense against aggression? I think sometimes this, sometimes that. And we have to intuitively figure it out, think about it, and be open to both. And it's a tricky thing. It requires like physiotherapy,
Okay, Salman, let me interrupt you because we're gonna run over time if that's okay with you, Salman. We have a couple more questions in the room. Nisar, yes.
And I like like Freud, 10 minutes to clear.
Okay. Yes, of course. Nisag, could you unmute yourself? Tell us where you are, who you are.
I'm in India, so happy Holi, Dr. Akhtar. Holi ki shubhkamnaएं. I work in advertising. We get a bad rep, but we clean the tables just to make sure the food tastes good. So my question is there an idealization of making things conscious? Like, there are times when one could benefit being unconscious about something rather than becoming aware of it. So
there are 2 or 3 ways to answer this question. One is to think that one can make things unconscious conscious. It's not how much. So it's not like everything will become conscious, and a well-analyzed person will have no unconscious. Of course not. Of course not. It's like saying that if we take out some water from Atlantic Ocean, there'll be no Atlantic Ocean left. No, the unconscious is vast, and it's also replenished. And the unconscious is not a static. It's also replenished by daily repressions, but also replenished by capturing through the preconscious important information that might come handy one day. So the unconscious is not only receptive, it's also acquisitive, and therefore is constantly refilled and such. So that's one piece, right? Second piece is that the unconscious has its own methods and purposes. The conscious has its own methods and purposes. So nobody is claiming primacy and supremacy of anything. I mean, if we had no unconscious, we would not be able to dream. If we had no unconscious, I wouldn't have said to this woman that your boy will have a Japanese girlfriend. This came straight from the unconscious, then became spoken, then became mentalized. So please don't leave this meeting by thinking that becoming conscious is somehow inherently superior thing. Of course not. All the poets will die if that was the case.
We have another question from Agustin. Could you unmute yourself? Tell us where you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, tell us where you are, who you are.
Yes. Hello, I am Agustin Smelovsky, Hungarian Society Training Analyst, and I am very happy to be here, also again lately coming. And just I would like to say that I was very happy that you mentioned Ferenczi, because when I read this fantastic paper and I saw the comparison like the 2 poles, Freud and Winnicott, I felt a bit discomfort, because for me, historically taking the steps, the opposition is like Freud and Ferenczi, and then Klein and Winnicott. One generation, next generation. So historically speaking, I think that they are equal at that level. And thank you for doing this correction here now. Thank you. It was a very good paper. Thank you.
May I just say, because there are many people who are younger than me, and it's becoming more frequent now that everybody is younger than me. But so for younger people, please, let me look at somebody young. Please read 3 papers by Ferenczi. If you don't read, you're harming yourself. If you read, you'll become a better therapist. These 3 papers of Ferenczi must be read. There's no excuse for not reading them. One is a paper called The Unwelcome Child and His Death Instinct. That is one of the best papers about neglect and rejection and how to handle it. Second, The Confusion of Tongues Between the Child and the Adult is the best paper ever written, I think, even today, about childhood sexual abuse and its long-term deleterious effect on human mind and technique. Third is the analysis of a child in the analysis of an adult. If you read these 3 papers, you're okay. If you don't read these papers, you're not okay.
We have Malin Force from Norway. One more question, and then we're going to close around 12:30 by my time. Malin, could you unmute yourself, introduce yourself?
Malin Force, I'm in Hammerfest, Norway. It's actually the world's most northern town. I'm so sorry to be late, and I don't really have a question. I have more of a comment. I just want to thank you, Dr. Akhtar. You wrote the paper I love the most and that I really recommend. And it's called The Normal and Pathological Generosity. It's so brilliant and very funny. And I cited it a lot, and I've read it so many times because I think it's really to the point. Thank you.
I want to tell you, I was in Blinden, and somebody told me that Dr. Chillingmo's office is nearby. And I walked up to, I was a great admirer of his. This was in 1991. And I walked up to his office and he was on vacation that day, holiday. And I was very disappointed that I couldn't meet him. But I wrote to him and he wrote back to me and he was very kind to me and very nice.
Great.
So I just wanted to let everybody know there was a confusion because for some reason Zoom got the hours all mixed up. So we actually started an hour and a half ago on this call, and Dr. Akhtar has been kind enough to overstay to accommodate all of you who came in late, which is most of you actually. We will try to fix this for next March because the US moves their clocks for some reason earlier than Europe does and other countries. But Agustin, maybe we could just show slides, as we conclude. I'll also conclude with a comment that Salman and I were talking before the meeting about how in the interpersonal tradition, Freud is the father of psychoanalysis and Ferenczi is the mother of psychoanalysis, not Winnicott. But there's enough set resemblance. So I just want to let people know that hopefully there will be no time confusion in April. We will be having members of the Psychoanalytic Formulation Collective, headed by Deborah Cabanis from Columbia, and one of our younger colleagues, Shirin Ali, talking about a chapter from their book on the importance of psychodynamic formulation. This is a great book. I was a collaborator in the psychodynamic formulation project. It's a great teaching book for those of you who are teaching younger colleagues, but it's also interesting to older practitioners as well. And the next slide is just to let you know about our June Journal Club, in which Diana Diamond and Frank Yeomans will be talking about a chapter from their book, Treating Pathological Narcissism with Transference-Focused Psychotherapy. Dr. Otto Kernberg is also one of the authors of this book, and he may join us. So you might want to save the date, June 13th, for the final book club of this academic year. And Dr. Akhtar, I wanted to thank you so much. You can get rid of the slides, Agustin, and give us a gallery view. I wanted to thank you for everything. I love your paper, of course, and I thought it was brilliant. I was reading it on the Sunday, and I texted him and said, "I love this paper," and I do. And I'm glad we had you here today. And a round of applause for Dr. Akhtar, please.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.